The warehouse air was thick with tension, the smell of sweat and fear clinging to the walls. Roman Reigns stood at the entrance, his massive frame silhouetted by the dim, flickering light overhead. The air was cool, but his body radiated heat, his muscles tense like a coiled spring. 3 men, their faces obscured by cheap tattoos and hardened sneers, stood in front of him, clearly unimpressed by his presence. They were used to intimidating others, used to bending the weak to their will. But they hadn't faced Roman. "Where is she?" Roman's voice was low, almost a growl, but every syllable carried the weight of a man who had been through too much to tolerate another second of their games. The leader, a wiry man whose neck bore a snake tattoo, smirked, shaking his head. "What makes you think you can walk in here and—" Before he could finish, Roman moved, his body a blur. He closed the distance between them with terrifying speed, his fist slamming into the man's midsection so hard it lifted him off the ground. He was sent crashing into a stack of wooden crates, the impact reverberating through the room. The other 2 men drew knives, but Roman was already on them. A swift elbow to the face sent one staggering backward, and a knee to the ribs dropped the other to the floor with a wheeze. Roman took a breath, his cold eyes scanning the room as he stood over the fallen men. "I don't have time for this," he muttered. "Where is she?" The snake-tattooed leader coughed, trying to get his breath back. "The docks, warehouse 12. She's there, man. Just leave us alone." Roman shoved the man aside, not even sparing him a second glance. He turned and stormed out of the building, his boots thudding on the concrete. He didn't need to waste any more time. The answer was clear. Mia, the journalist who had been digging too deep, too fast, was somewhere out there, in danger, and Roman wasn't about to let anyone harm her. His Dodge Charger roared to life as he threw himself behind the wheel, the engine growling like a beast unleashed. The tires squealed as he tore through the streets, headlights cutting through the night, heading toward the docks. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. Roman's jaw clenched as he pushed the car faster, his mind racing through the possibilities. Mia had uncovered something big, something that someone didn't want out, but now she was paying the price. When he reached the docks, the hulking silhouette of Warehouse 12 loomed ahead, a dark and silent sentinel. Roman killed the engine, stepping out into the cool night air. He didn't need to be quiet, he didn't need to be subtle. But he was. Moving toward the building with the precision of a predator, Roman's senses were on high alert. He could hear the faint sounds of voices inside muffled, distorted by the thick walls. One voice was higher than the others, a woman's voice. His heart tightened in his chest. Roman's footsteps were silent on the gravel as he approached the warehouse. He didn't hesitate as he moved through the shadows, slipping past stacks of crates and piles of discarded equipment. He wasn't here to be seen. He was here to finish this. Inside, the sight he found was exactly what he'd feared. Mia sat bound to a chair, her mouth gagged, but her eyes wide, filled with terror. Around her, 4 men stood. One of them, a brute with scars running down his arms, laughed. "The boss says we keep her quiet until morning. Then she disappears. No one's ever going to know what she had." Roman's fists clenched, his knuckles cracking as he stepped forward. Not happening. He moved first, faster than anyone could react. His fist slammed into the brute's jaw, sending the man sprawling across the floor. Before the others could even begin to raise their weapons, Roman was on them, throwing punches with the kind of precision and power that left no room for error. A right hook sent one man flying into a stack of metal barrels. A knee to the ribs dropped another like a sack of potatoes. The last man reached for a gun, but Roman was already there. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisting with a savage yank, and the gun clattered to the floor. An uppercut finished the job, and the man crumpled, unconscious, before he even hit the ground. Mia's eyes met Roman's, and for a brief second, there was a flash of recognition. She had no idea who he was, but in that moment she understood. He was here to save her. He always had been. Roman knelt down beside her, his fingers working quickly to untie the ropes that bound her to the chair. When he finally pulled the gag from her mouth, her voice was hoarse but filled with relief. Who are you?" Roman looked at her, his expression softening for just a second. "Doesn't matter. You're safe now." He helped her to her feet, his arm steadying her as they moved toward the exit. Mia was shaking, but Roman didn't let her falter. The sirens in the distance were growing louder, but he wasn't worried. They had a little more time. Roman moved like a man who had lived through hundreds of situations just like this one. No hesitation, no second guessing. He kept his focus on the door as he carried Mia out of the warehouse and into the night. The moment they stepped outside, Roman's senses heightened. The air was cold, the sound of police sirens growing closer. But he had one thing on his mind, getting Mia out before the storm hit. He moved quickly, his boots thudding against the pavement as he made his way to the car. Mia clung to him, her body still shaking, but Roman's presence was like a shield. No one was going to hurt her again. He opened the door, easing Mia inside before sliding behind the wheel. The engine roared to life once more, the tires screeching as Roman floored the gas, speeding away from the docks. As they drove through the streets, the sirens faded into the distance. Roman's jaw was set, his hands steady on the wheel, but his mind was still processing what had just happened. Mia had been caught in the crossfire of something much bigger than she could have imagined, and he couldn't allow that to happen again. "I owe you," Mia said softly, her voice still trembling. Roman glanced at her, his expression hard but his eyes soft. "No one deserves to go through what you did. No one." They drove in silence for a few moments, but for Roman, the fight was far from over. He'd saved her tonight, but there were still people out there, pulling strings, hiding in the shadows, and Roman Reigns wasn't the kind of man to let them get away with it. Not tonight. Not ever. As the lights of the city flickered past, Roman made a promise to himself. He'd find out who was behind this, and he'd make sure they paid for what they'd done. The world wasn't going to change overnight, but as long as Roman Reigns was breathing, he'd keep fighting. The night wasn't over, not by a long shot,